Excellent. Well, MPCA Wash Day. Good day, everyone. My name is Leya Charles. I am the Impaired Waters List Coordinator for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And we're going to talk here today about the Triennial Standards Review. So I am not the only one who is hosting the Triennial Standards Review. I have a colleague along with me. Her name is Laura, so I'll let her introduce herself as well.
Hi, I am Laura Lyle. I'm a research scientist in the Water Quality Standards Unit here at PCA.
Excellent. Thanks, Laura. So today we will be talking about the Triennial Standards Review. So you are in the right place if you are here to talk about that. So first I'm going to go through a little bit of background on what is a water quality standard, and then we'll talk about what is the Triennial Standards Review. We'll go through our work plan. Don't worry, we'll get there. There'll be a lot of good details. And then we'll talk about how you actually make a public comment. So first off, excuse me, in the Clean Water Act, we have our water quality standards, right? And a water quality standard is a number or a narrative statement to protect a water body for a specific beneficial use. A beneficial use example could be aquatic recreation, like these kids that are on the slide here, enjoying a nice summer day swimming, which sounds lovely right now when it's cold outside. So yes, a water quality standard is that number or statement to protect for a beneficial use. And we're going to talk about what a beneficial use is. So here on this slide, you might hear PCA employees saying designated use. You might hear them saying beneficial use, and both are the same thing. We designate what those beneficial uses are in rule. And so you can see over on that right-hand side, there is a list of the 7 different beneficial uses in Minnesota rule. And you'll also hear us refer to things as classes. So that first bullet, class 1 for drinking water standards, that is the designated use that we want to use that water body for drinking. Class 2, we want to be able to use that for aquatic life. We want to protect for all the critters and all the fish that live in that water body. Also in class 2 is for aquatic recreation, for swimming, for fishing, etc. So all of those different beneficial uses listed out in Minnesota rule have different water quality standards to protect each of those uses. So let's go on to an example of what that even looks like. Yeah, right here. So like I mentioned, waters can have multiple different beneficial uses, right? You want to be able to drink from it. You also want to be able to protect all of the critters in the lake or in the stream as well. And it is extremely common. In fact, most water bodies across the entire state of Minnesota have multiple beneficial uses. It's very rare for them to only have one. And so in this scenario, we have one water quality standard to protect for drinking water. You want to be able to consume that water for chloride and for it to not taste salty. And then we also have another standard to protect for aquatic life, right? Fish and critters are sensitive to salts. And so we have a different standard there. So in this scenario, and in every scenario where this happens, the most stringent standard is what we would use for that impairment determination, right? I mentioned I am the Impaired Waters List Coordinator. When we do assessments, we're using that most stringent standard. So that 230 milligrams per liter would be what we would use. And that is the case for all of those beneficial uses and all of those standards, the most stringent would apply. So next up, let's talk a little bit about the difference between a standard and a limit, right? So there are a difference there. A water quality standard is that goal that applies to the entire water body, that entire stream, that entire lake, that we want that water in that water body to meet, which is related to, but different from a limit, which would be in a permit limit, right? That is that effluent goal that only applies to what is directly coming out of a pipe from the end of the pipe. And so you would have a different limit for the water that is coming out of the end of that pipe, and then it gets into that water body and gets diluted and whatnot. So those two are related, absolutely, but they are different numbers. And so what we're talking about in the Triennial Standards Review is related to the standards portion of this. Okay, so that was just some quick background. If you're not familiar with the structure of how Minnesota does their standards with those beneficial uses and assigning those standards with those uses, let's talk more now about what we're here for, right? The Triennial Standards Review. So the Triennial Standards Review is a requirement from the Federal Clean Water Act for all states or tribal nations with treatment as a state to look at every 3 years, right? Triennial, to look at every 3 years, all of the water quality standards throughout the state to see, are there changes that need to be made? Is this number the correct number for chloride, for example? Are there standards that we need to have on the books that we don't have a standard for right now? That is what we're looking at here in this Triennial Standards Review. So it is a requirement of states to perform, and it is a really great way for the public to get engaged. Because this is what we're here right now to talk about. What do we need to protect our water quality? And so we're in the first of our 2 different public meetings, right? So we're here January 23rd at 6 o'clock. You logged into your computer to hear me ramble on about water quality standards. And the exact same content will be presented next Tuesday, January 28th at our next public meeting. So, feel free to hop on and listen once again, or, there might be different questions or whatnot that come up then, but it will be the same content that's going to be shared. And our public comment period started December 9, and it does run through February 7. So get your comments in before then. We'll talk more at the end about how to do that. So let's talk about the timeline here, right? I mentioned Triennial Standards Review every 3 years. So right now, we are in that public comment phase, that purple box. After the public comment phase, there will be all of those public comments come in from February 7. We're going to be looking at and reviewing those public comments and making changes or reprioritizing to our work plan. We're going to talk about the work plan in a moment of what we might need to change in MPCA's priorities. Then goes on to the rest of those 3 years of the actual development of the water quality standards, doing that technical work, doing the rulemaking, promulgating that standard, right? And so there's going to be more opportunity for public comment for when each of those specific standards goes into rulemaking, right? So right now in the Triennial Standards Review, let's go to the next slide and talk about what actually it is you can comment on. So what is open for review right now is pretty broad, but the first bullet, we have developed a work plan. So this is what we have heard from our leaders at MPCA and from our staff at MPCA. We've looked at all of the resources that we have available, both scientific resources and personnel resources. What are the tasks that are really critical to protect our water quality in Minnesota that we have prioritized to work on in these next 3 years, right? And in that work plan, it is still draft right now. So that's why it's open for public comment. We want to know, do you agree? Are there items that are missing from that work plan? Are there items you think we should change in the prioritization in that work plan? And whatnot from there. So that is, we would like to be, transparent and let you know, this is what we think. What do you think? And then also what is up for public comment in the TSR is anything in Minnesota Rules 7050, which governs all of the water quality standards throughout the state, and in 752, which covers the Lake Superior Basin. And then finally, you can comment on any variances from those rules, from those water quality standards. So like I mentioned, these are what's open for review right now. It's pretty broad, right? It's all of the water quality standards throughout the state. It is that draft work plan. And obviously, you will also have opportunity to comment when we are actually doing the rulemaking for each of those standards. So I want to turn it over to Laura, and she's going to walk through that draft work plan. It is listed on our Triennial Standards Review website. If you look that up, you can get a copy of it. And so we've broken it down in the slides so that we can really go through each kind of column, and she'll walk us through that on what the content is.
Great, thank you. So our water quality standards work plan is broken up into 3 different groups. We've tried to prioritize our different projects based on kind of the status, the staff time that we have available. We've prioritized based on our degree of need, whether there's new data or science. We've thought about impacts of the standards. And so we've tried to group them into compartments to better express how we're tackling all these projects. So the first grouping is group one. These standards are those that we are actively working on. So we have data that we need, we have staff assigned to work on them. Some of these projects we've already completed initial rulemaking steps, like requesting comments from the public, or we may have a technical support document already out and available. And so these are our highest priority items. The second group are those that are in kind of what we call technical development. So these are kind of in the early stages of development. They're still high priority to us, but the work that's been done on these at this point isn't as far along as those that are in group one. We anticipate that those in group two may not enter rulemaking for maybe another year or two. They're just kind of further behind in that first group. The third group is, we're calling it tracking and evaluation. This is for standards that we still see as important and we have a need for them, but they're lower priority at this point in time, just for a variety of reasons. We may be lacking certain data to complete an assessment, or we may have staff time that is not available due to time being spent on other projects. And so they're there to demonstrate that at least, these are still priorities to us. They're just not as far along as the rest. So what I'm going to do next is just walk through each group and go through a discussion of kind of each project and kind of give you a little bit more detail about each one of our planned projects. So this is our list of group one projects, which again are those that we're currently actively working on. The first one there is our revisions to the lake eutrophication standard. And this is a project that will add new standards to address eutrophication for northern shallow lakes, and it'll broaden the application of existing standards to cold water lakes. This project also reviews lake designations, and it adopts a tiered aquatic life use framework, TALU, to lakes. This project is pretty far along. It's already undergone public comment, and we expect it to be finalized this calendar year. Next, related, another eutrophication project is site-specific standards for Red Lake, where MPCA is working alongside the Red Lake Nation to address unique conditions in Red Lake. These site-specific standards have already received public comment, and those comments are being addressed before we send to EPA for finalization. So this project is also pretty far along. The next project on our list here is the Class 2A, 2B use class modifications. PCA has been systematically revising these use classes that protect aquatic life. These revisions are needed to implement TALU, the tiered aquatic life use. New use subclasses are developed as part of TALU, and it's based on the aquatic biology in these water bodies. And so this rulemaking will actually be the third set of these types of revisions. This was in group one in our last triennial review as well, but that was a different set. So we completed one of these revisions during our last triennial review period. This is another one. Next on our list is a ongoing project to update and improve our Class 1 water quality standards. So Class 1 waters are protected as sources of domestic consumption or drinking water use. This isn't to be confused with what MDH deals with. They deal with what comes out of the tap. We work with the actual source water bodies. And so the key plans for this project are to update the existing Class 1 water quality standards and the methods to reflect current science, and to add water quality standards for pollutants that don't currently have water quality standards. The last two there are nitrogen related projects. And both of them are for protection of aquatic life. The first one is a revision of our existing ammonia water quality standard. And the second is adopting a new water quality standard for nitrate. Again, both of these to protect aquatic life. And these projects have been priorities for several years. And there are now both draft technical support documents for both chemicals. So in this proposed work plan, we've moved these projects up from group 2 into group 1. So that was our group 1 projects. And then now I'm going to quickly discuss the group 2 water quality standards. Again, these are in technical development. We have a new addition to our work plan. Recently, EPA published aquatic life criteria for 2 PFAS chemicals, PFOS and PFOA. And so this would be protecting of aquatic life. And also related to PFAS, we also have plans to develop a water quality standard for PFOS in fish tissue. So this would be to protect human health, those consuming fish. So PCA has developed site-specific criteria for PFOS in fish tissue that apply to specific water bodies in the Twin Cities metro area. But given the wide detection of PFOS in our environment, we anticipate the need to develop water quality standards for fish in PFOS in fish tissue in all water bodies of the state. Next, we have 2 pesticides, clothianidin and imidacloprid. These were named surface water pesticides of concern by our Department of Ag in 2020 due to detections of these chemicals in several rivers and streams, and they've been detected at concentrations that approach or exceed EPA's aquatic life benchmarks. So to protect aquatic life, we're proposing to work on water quality standards for these 2 chemicals, since we know that they have the potential to impact aquatic life in our state. Next, we plan to revise our existing total suspended solids aquatic life standard to accommodate those waters that have naturally high TSS, but also have high quality aquatic communities. This does happen in certain areas of the state, like north central Minnesota in the glacial lakes, as well as the Rainy River Basin in northern Minnesota. And so we've had issues where these systems appear impaired, but they still have high quality biology, and that can be problematic. So we want to try to address that with an update to that standard. Lastly, we have a couple metals, aluminum and copper. Both of these chemicals have updated EPA water quality criteria. And so the understanding of the toxicity of these 2 chemicals has evolved since our water quality standards were developed. And so we would like to update the aquatic life standards for these chemicals. So that's the group 2. Lastly, we have the group 3 projects. First, PCA is evaluating vegetation data for the lower Mississippi River, which has shown increased wild rice growth, even though the presence of sulfate is higher than 10 milligrams per liter, which is the statewide standard for wild rice. And so PCA is determining if the wild rice beneficial use is being met in that area at the ambient sulfate levels. And we're considering developing a site-specific standard that protects the beneficial use while recognizing this unique environmental context. Next, we are also evaluating in the updated science about mercury in fish tissue. Our current tissue standard is a bit outdated, and we're hoping to review the new science to determine an approach for that revision. So this would be protecting human health from mercury concentrations in fish tissue. Chloride and sulfate, these are kind of long-time priorities for the agency. This would be to add a sulfate water quality standard and revise the water quality standard for chloride for aquatic life. EPA has been doing some research on ionic toxicity to aquatic life, And the focus has been on how ions interact and how the toxicity can change depending on the concentration of the different ions in the mixture. And they're planning to release a draft criteria for ions in 2025. And because of that, we anticipate wanting to use EPA's updated science. And so we've moved these to group 3 while we wait EPA's draft and final criteria to ensure that we're going to be using the best available science when we derive values for those 2 chemicals. We've also seen in our state an increase in algal blooms in lakes, and that may impact the recreation beneficial use, even in waters where nutrient standards are not exceeded. And so EPA has criteria for 2 algal toxins that are associated with algal blooms, and that protects the recreation designated use. And so MPCA is considering adding criteria for those 2 toxins to protect the recreation. And lastly, we've moved cadmium for aquatic life protection down to group 3 from group 2. EPA had developed an updated cadmium criteria that we were planning to adopt, but EPA has reevaluated that criteria. And so we're going to continue to track EPA's work, but we don't anticipate moving forward with it until EPA has finalized and updated that criteria. And so that's a quick rundown on what we have proposed for the next 3 years of water quality standards development.
Thanks, Laura. So Leya here again to go over how do you actually submit a public comment and what does that look like into the future. So again, we will just review what are those materials for comment. So that first material for comment is the work plan that Laura just walked through, right? Each of the standards that are in each of those groups, the ones that we are committing to do within the next 3 years and the ones that we're going to do in future years as well. Wanting to be transparent to you guys on the plans and intentions that we have in the future and wanting to know, do you agree? Do you disagree? As well as anything in Minnesota Rule 7050 and 7052, and any of the variances. So that is the review. You can, if you are one of those people who loves to submit things on phones, you can go ahead and scan that QR code and it'll take you straight to our Smart Comments page. Or we're gonna pop in the chat as well, a link directly to our public comment page. You can also go on our MPCA website on the Triennial Standards Review page. If you scroll down, there's a blue button that says Provide Feedback. And when you click on that, it'll pop up a new tab, and that'll be our Smart Comments tab. So you can go ahead and type a comment straight in that Smart Comments box, provide some of your contact information so we can get a hold of you and answer your questions or address your comments if you have them. You can also use the attachment form to attach if you have a PDF or a Word document of a letter you would like to give us. If you have extra data you want to provide, that would be amazing as well. We definitely encourage you to provide any specifics on public comments, any specific data, any specific standards that need to be addressed in the state. Those help us to make those changes in that draft work plan before we send it to EPA. So this is the last slide I have for you, and then we'll go into questions, but what is next? So as I mentioned, we are in the first of our public meetings. There'll be another public meeting next Tuesday with the same content presented and more opportunity for folks to engage, ask questions, provide comment. And you do need to get those public comments in before midnight on February 7th. That will be the end of the public comment period. When that public comment period closes, we'll be taking all those in and reviewing them with our staff and with our leaders here at the agency. And we will review and respond to that public feedback, updating our draft work plan as needed before we submit that final work plan to EPA. And they go ahead and look at that and do give a thumbs up of approval for that work plan. So that is a bit of background information that we have for you about what is a standard, what is on our work plan. We are here until 7:30, so we have the next hour dedicated to talk through questions you may have, to provide comments that you may have that you would like to put on the record. Again, that little QR box will take you straight to that Smart Comments page. This is a picture of the Mississippi River from around my home. So Wopida, thank you. And I will turn it over to Bill Cole, who also works in water quality standards, and he's going to facilitate some questions for us.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Leah. Appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bill Cole. I supervise the Water Quality Standards Unit here at the Pollution Control Agency. So we're here to hear your thoughts on what new standards we might need, what existing standards might need to be revised, what you think of our proposed work plan. You know, we put this out there as something to react to. It reflects our current perception of what our priorities are based on need, based on what data we have and what resources we have. I encourage you, even if you do provide verbal comments tonight, to provide written comments to us as well. That would be very helpful to us, and to provide any supporting data that you might have would be great. If you do provide comment tonight, I would just ask that you would provide your name so we know who that is, and so that's clear on the recording. With us tonight are other people, other subject matter experts, scientists from our unit and water quality standards that will help answer questions. And I think Paul Pistano is online too. He's the manager of our section. So with that, I will open it up for comments. Thank you.
So it looks like first we have a hand from Paula.
Okay.
Yes, I think that one of the problems, Bill, is that the way in which the MPCA has communicated what you're planning to do doesn't enable citizens to comment. For example, it says revisions to lake eutrophication water quality standards, but it doesn't say whether the purpose is because we found the standards are too weak and we're going to strengthen them for this kind of water, or because we found that there are a whole lot of areas where we're not as concerned about eutrophication because the lake is already dead and we want to get rid of the standards. And you're going to have completely different people interested in commenting depending on what you're going to do. So I think what I'm going to say is that you should really add 2 weeks to this schedule, and you should actually tell people up front, revisions to lake eutrophication standards, we're doing this because our fishermen are upset at the degree of algae, and then if you're looking at lake eutrophication, why aren't you looking at sulfate? Because the MPCA was a co-author on a study in 2017 saying that with high levels of sulfate, it can as much as double nitrogen and phosphorus release and algal blooms. So if you're looking at lake eutrophication, what are you looking for and for what purpose? Because I've been doing this for 15 years. Every time the PCA has changed the standard, they've made it weaker or tried to make it weaker and failed. I have not been involved in any situation where they said, boy, we really want to strengthen protections. So what, I mean, and I'm not going to ask you to do that now, but on this, instead of just saying revisions, well, what are you trying to do? And, on the one that I'm most knowledgeable about, the classes 2A and 2B, what has happened is now there's no way for a citizen, and I'm working now with everybody from regular members of the public to tribes. We can't tell what the waters are labeled and what the standards are. There is no listing of 2B versus 2BD waters. It's nowhere. So I've had people call me and say, what standard applies to this lake? And I said, there's no way to know, because yes, I went to the MPCA online, designations, but they're not updated. They're not current. So here's what I'm going to say is that for the first step should be making it transparent. What are your classes and what you want to do? And in your number 1 category, the MPCA let it slip that what you really want to do with class 1, and this may be inaccurate, but at least 2 people have told me this, is get rid of the secondary EPA standards, including particularly the one for sulfate, so that there would no longer be a limit of 250 milligrams per liter for class 1 waters after the tribes and Water Legacy succeeded in winning that case at the Supreme Court. And if that's what's the priority here is, then you should be upfront about it. Not say, we're going to do human health standards, but say, no, we're going to get rid of anything that we don't think is a health standard. And thus we're going to have no protection at all for waters where sulfate can increase eutrophication and kill fish. So is that really what you're trying to do with class 1 standards? That's what I've been told. And the reaction to that would be really different from saying, yeah, we're improving our standards, so we're going to put manganese in there. Because we have an HRL of 100 micrograms and we don't have any class 1 standard. So, and the problem with public reaction is that by design or just by not thinking it through, these lists are not adequate for the public to respond to them. And I think there's at least one, and I would say the number 1 priority, there should be conductance, sulfate, and hardness standards for class 2 waters, period. And the reason for that is it's not just wild rice that gets hurt. It's the wild rice, it's the fish, it's the eutrophication, it's everything. And it was a very big, there was a sort of a representation, we're getting rid of them in agriculture and we're going to do everything for class 2. There never was any plan to protect class 2. It was just to make it easier for mining companies to pollute because it's not even on your list. So I think that as a member of, sort of working and organizing citizens, hundreds and thousands of whom have signed petitions or comments, they feel that no one's listening to them. And I don't even know to say, well, yeah, the MPCA is finally listening and they're going to do this, or the MPCA is still trying to back away from making a standard, because I can't tell.
So what I'm hearing, Paula, thank you for your comments. One of the biggest thing I'm hearing there is greater clarity and greater transparency. So I appreciate that.
And where's, if you're getting pressure from the industry to do something and you're trying to figure out, do you have to give them what they want? I can see that could be part of your function, but then say that. Because that's what happened with the class 3 and 4 standards is years and years, and all the data in the world didn't matter. All the thousands of people didn't matter. So and nitrates, there was a technical report in 2010 that may have, and there's now a technical report on the same issue, which has less protective standards and doesn't explicitly deal with endangered species. Doesn't create confidence, Bill, just doesn't. It creates a sense of in the community that we're counting on you guys to protect the waters, and most of the time we're being called in to make sure you don't remove the protections that are already there. And it's awful.
Thank you, Paula. Other comments, suggestions?
Bill, I think there's some questions in the chat.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank
you. Thank you, Paula. I was going to say, Bill, I'm not sure if you can see the chat, but we do have a couple questions on the side here. If you want me to go ahead and read off the first one.
Sure. Yep.
And then Paula did write the first question. I'll just read through it so everyone can hear it. Is there going to be a chance to ask questions? The Triennial Standards review documents are ambiguous. As to the purpose of the quote review during the past 15 years, all MPCA proposed triennial review changes have been deregulation. It seems that this year may be different and there may be an opportunity to strengthen water quality standards. Yep. And then the following statement, we tribal nations, hundreds of petitioners and members of the public have spent thousands of hours requesting water quality standards for Class 2 waters for parameters that either have no standards or weak standards, and requesting the MPCA desist from its practice of deregulating pollution. It's hard to interest members of the public in commenting when there's a history of listening only to industry and selecting projects, screening evidence. Having a dialogue instead of sticking the community at the end of a long meeting would be a great first step to begin to restore confidence. Are you checking? Next one, that's just logistics. And then from Gary Dukes, what are you going to do about nitrates in Minnesota drinking water?
So we are working on a nitrate standard for aquatic life, so that will help reduce nitrate in the environment to begin with. We are looking at we are working on our Class 1 revisions and developing new standards for those. So if there's a suggestion that nitrate should be considered in those, that would be great, and we'll take that into consideration.
Great, thanks, Bill. The next comment / question through the chat, the TSS revisions discussion was skipped. Howard says, since I did most of the work getting it approved, I'm curious what changes are proposed. Thanks.
Yes, we're just investigating that right now. So we're finding that in some cases we have very healthy aquatic life occurring in our streams, particularly where the TSS standard is exceeded. So we're looking at how we can perhaps change that standard to reflect what is happening with the aquatic communities where they are healthy. We're still fairly early on in the process, and it's as you can imagine, Howard, it's pretty complicated, but we've got good people working on it.
And that is all the questions in the chat. Looks like Paula sent another question through. What parameters are proposed to be removed or weakened in Class 1? What parameters are proposed to be added?
So again, we're still early on in that process. What I will say is that in Laura Lyle can add to this or correct me if I'm wrong. Currently, our Class 1 standards are the federal maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, and they are incorporated by reference. A couple of problems that we have with that is that the MCLs are not updated very often. A lot of them are not based on current science. The MCLs also take into consideration available treatment and available treatment technology and treatment cost. So we don't think that that's appropriate. So what we are intending to do is to retain the federal drinking water standards unless there is more recent science where we could adopt additional standards and replace those MCLs. Right now, we're looking at, I don't know, about 100 or so new standards to be added. But again, we're still working through that. And I can't tell you which ones are going to be added or dropped at this point.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Next comment from Jean says, you've been working on nitrate standard for 15 years. Is anything different now?
Anything different now? We had help from EPA and others in doing some toxicity studies. So we have relatively recent science to support our proposal. And we feel like the timing is right now. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. And we're anxious to move forward with that. And we've indicated that that's a priority in how we've articulated our work plan.
Next comment, Paula just notes that we can see how hard it would be for a member of the public to comment if there is no proposal for which to react.
I can appreciate that, Paula. I mean, it's not our intention to.
Oh no. Oh.
At that point, that there will be a notice of intent to adopt rules, and there'll be another opportunity to comment at that point as well. And in both of those cases, we will have a more clear proposal for people to react to.
Hey, Bill, so sorry you did freeze almost through that whole comment. Do you mind just stating that one again?
Sure, the whole 9 yards, or where do I go?
I would say you froze for about 20 seconds.
Where was I? I'm not sure. So we will do another request for comments, which our proposal will be much clearer then, because we're still trying to develop our proposal essentially. So the public will be able to react in a better way, and they'll be able to react to something a little bit more solid. In addition to that, we'll receive the comments, we'll make modifications based on those comments, and then we'll publish a notice of intent to adopt rules, and then the public will have another opportunity to weigh in on what our thinking is. Did you get that, Hannah?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that.
No problem. Yep, so it looks like we're all caught up on comments, but we will wait for more to come through. Looks like we did get another one from Paula. Where can members of the public see a complete listing of the classification of Minnesota waters 2A, 2BD, 2B, etc.? Can you share a link?
Yeah, so I don't know if Will Bouchard is on. He's been the one that's been working on the 2A, 2B classifications, working through TALU. But there's a document that's identified in our rule by reference where those waters are listed. And I think somebody's putting it in chat, so. And we know that this is an issue, and we're working on developing some interactive maps, so that would be easier for the public to actively search a map and find out what the use classifications are.
Looks like we did get some links through in the chat from Laura. Thank you. Perfect. We'll just give it another couple minutes here. Let people think of other questions. Next question came through the chat from Jean. PCA has said in the past that it will only apply its aquatic standard to wastewater treatment systems. Are you working with EG so they have an enforceable standard?
So thanks, Jean. So water quality standards apply to all waters of the state. It doesn't differentiate between if a state is receiving agricultural runoff or discharge from a municipal wastewater treatment plant, for example. There are differences in how we regulate sources of pollution under the Clean Water Act. Under the Clean Water Act, we have National Pollution Discharge Elimination Systems permits, or NPDES permits, that apply to wastewater. There are some agricultural activities that are, quite frankly, exempt from Clean Water Act authorities. An example of that is irrigation return water from cultivated crops. So even though the standards, they apply regardless of what the source is, our ability to regulate some entities that cause pollution can be limited, and that's our reality.
I also wanted to share a note that if you click on the TSR work plan document on our webpage and you scroll down, there are some project descriptions, which give you a little more of a hint to why each of these standards are being prioritized on the work plan. And I'll put that link in the chat as well.
Thanks, Leia. Okay, we got a couple more comments through the chat. Jean submitted another comment. If your reality isn't helping Minnesotans, what will you be advocating to make nitrogen pollution less? So we do, yeah.
So again, the scope of this discussion is standards and what we can do in standards. There are likely things outside of water quality standards that we, as an agency, can do to help reduce nitrogen pollution. But I'm not prepared to speak about that. It's kind of beyond the scope of the meeting.
Thanks, Bill. And then Paula submitted another question. Are you suggesting the state has no ability to adopt requirements limiting use of fertilizers or otherwise controlling nitrate pollution from ag?
I'm not suggesting that. I'm not an expert in that. Again, the purpose of this meeting is to talk about standards, whether they're appropriate, what new standards might be needed, and what our priorities should be.
Thanks for that, Bill. We'll give it another minute, see if we got anything else through. Would like to remind folks as well that if other questions come up, oh, sorry, there's my dogs. If other questions do come up, you're always welcome to attend the next meeting. There should be good discussion in that one as well.
Looks like Paula has her hand up.
Yeah. Bill, would you be able to send a us or Water Legacy and whoever else asks for it, the EPA's draft criteria related to chloride and sulfate and other ionic pollutants. Because it seems that some of the timing on when that rulemaking is going to take place will depend on when that is released by EPA. And you're more likely to get a draft criterion collection than we are going to see that online.
Sure, I'd be happy to send that on once we receive it. My understanding is that they currently are hoping to have a draft ready for peer review by the end of the year on the ION model. So it might be some time.
Do you know who's doing that at the EPA? I thought the person who was doing the ionic pollutants had retired.
Boy, I don't know. I don't know if anyone else on the call from the unit knows that or not.
Okay, great. We'll do, I suppose, one last call for questions. Okay. Seeing none in the chat, I think we are probably good to wrap up today's meeting. Bill, Leya, Laura, any final thoughts to share?
Just thank you for attending. I appreciate hearing from everyone, and send in your written comments. We'd really appreciate that.
Awesome. Great. Okay, thanks everyone for joining today. And have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks all.